This happened to me roughly 1.5 years ago, and I still feel anxious thinking back about what happened in the summer of 2023. It was the year I had my first success with my online business, which allowed me to start traveling Europe while working and saving up for my dream of buying farmland. 2023 started amazingly. I lived a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who study abroad. I am originally from Germany. I am 32, turning 33 this year. The first few destinations were a wonderful contrast to the miserable cold winters that drag on for months in Germany. After having a tremendous time in Malta and Budapest, it was already the beginning of summer. My final destination that summer was to visit a friend. Let's call him Ben. He is about a year younger than me and is currently studying medicine in Varna, located in the very east of Bulgaria. It is an interesting place with lots of Soviet-style, slightly run-down architecture, but it still has its charm as a beach city. The people are very nice and there are some beautiful spots. There are many expats, and I spent my days enjoying the large parks near the beach itself, and its various cafes and clubs. I met lots of people and frequently went out to beach clubs with them on weekends. It was a nice, hot summer, and I was enjoying myself until one particular night. I was out with Ben and many of his university friends again. We partied all night, had drinks, danced for hours, and just enjoyed ourselves during this wonderful summer night. Since we had been to day events before the party, I started feeling tired and decided to head home. I should describe the layout of the city as it is quite unique. Varna has a beach along its entire length, and for most parts there are very big parks, stretching for kilometers along the beach before they lead to the city. My rented apartment was slightly northwest of the clubs, roughly a 10 to 15 minute walk, which I had done many times. People had warned me about occasional attacks, muggings, and robberies, always asking me to walk at least part of the way with someone. I usually did not listen, just walked with my music playing, though I remained wary of my surroundings. That night, a few people who were also tired left with me. They lived a bit more west, so I had to leave them after 5 minutes and continued alone with my music. It must have been around 4 a.m. when I came to a park I usually cross, separate from the main beach parks, closer to where I was living. Being summer and a weekend, there were still a few people walking around and driving, even at 4 a.m. When I entered the park, I was not shocked to see someone sitting on a bench maybe 50 meters ahead of me to the right. He was sitting there staring at his phone, and I remember the scene vividly. Behind him were some bushes and trees, but as the lighting in the park was very sparse, I only noticed at the last moment that someone was approaching him from behind through the bushes. I think because I walked into the park, the guy sitting on the bench must have briefly looked up from his phone and heard someone approaching. It all happened so fast. I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy still sitting there as he turned his head. Not immediately realizing the danger, I kept walking briefly before stopping. The guy on the bench screamed and ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I pulled off my headphones and stood there watching, not fully comprehending what was happening. You need to understand that this all happened so fast, until the guy who had just tried to attack the other person with a rock turned to face me. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run. When he lifted that rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction, I turned and ran for my life. He followed me for roughly 2 minutes. I could still see him behind me even after crossing the street. I ran around the block and was incredibly relieved to find a kebab shop still open. I rushed through the door. The people inside were shocked, and I could not speak straight, but I did not need to say much as the psychopath came to the store and started bashing the big window with a rock. When the glass broke, he finally ran away. What makes this even more chilling is that I later discovered I probably encountered someone who was not new to violence. In the same city, same park, someone had been bludgeoned and then killed with multiple stabs in the back just 1 year earlier. I waited a few minutes, put my music back in and walked home, carefully avoiding the park. Afterward, I was shaking at home, locking every door. I could not sleep well, and the next morning I discovered I had fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. I am forever grateful that this turned out okay. I am also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing might have saved both me and the guy on the bench. If I had not entered that park at that exact moment, the man on the bench might not have noticed his attacker in time. While this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean once, I think I learned that there are some situations you cannot control. Stay safe out there, folks, and maybe do not walk in the park alone at 4 a.m. in a foreign city. This happened when I was 19 or 20. I'm 31 now and rarely drink or go out anymore. But last weekend, a friend I hadn't seen in a couple of years asked me out, and we ended up going to a club on the same street where this story takes place. It reminded me of what happened. The legal drinking age in Brazil is 18, so people here start partying pretty early. And let's face it, no one really knows their limits when they start drinking. My friends and I had gone to this club. I honestly can't remember the name right now, but I know it closed down a couple of years ago. We had a great time and the sun was coming up as we were leaving. Most clubs here give you a credit card when you walk in where you either put in the money you plan on spending, or they work as a personal digital tab where bartenders add up what you're drinking and you pay for it on the way out. I paid for my stuff and sat outside to wait for my friends, who were taking a long time to get out, probably because they were drunk. As I sat there, I noticed a car across the street. There were 2 guys in the front seats, and one of them was out of the car trying to make this clearly drunk girl get inside. She was mumbling, stumbling, and struggling to keep her eyes open. She kept saying, "No, I don't want to go," shaking her head, clinging onto the car door. The guy was telling her to let go and get inside, saying, "We're just going to a friend's apartment to drink some more. It'll be fun, come on." I watched, wondering if I should do something. No one else seemed to notice. I looked at the club's security guard and he looked at me and shrugged, like it wasn't his responsibility. I looked back at the girl, feeling really uncomfortable but also scared. My friends were still nowhere to be seen, and I was alone. The security guard wasn't doing anything, and there were 3 guys. What if they decided to try and get me too? The girl said one more time that she didn't want to go with them. Before I even realized it, I got to my feet and shouted, "Hey!" The guy stopped trying to push the girl into the car for a moment and looked at me. "She said she doesn't want to go, dude," I said, starting to walk across the street even though my hands were shaking. And my voice was probably not the most convincing. "She's our friend. She's just drunk and being cranky. It's all good, we're just going to take her home," he said. He seemed a bit nervous and not exactly angry, which made me feel a little better, or at least less scared. "Do you know them?" I asked the girl. She just shook her head no, using the door as support to stay on her feet. Creep number 1, the one who was trying to push her into the car, looked at me, then to his friends who seemed frustrated. They started to say, "Come on, man, let's go, just leave it." Creep number one, now looking a bit pissed, grabbed the girl and pushed her towards me before getting into the car, and they all left. The girl nearly fell on her face, but I grabbed her and we walked back to the front of the club, my heart slowly going back to its normal rate. Only then did I realize my friends had come out and were watching everything from across the street with confused faces. We all meet random people at clubs, outside and walking down the street, so they probably thought I'd met someone. I started asking the girl what had happened, if she was alone, where her stuff was. She was an incoherent mess, mumbling about losing track of her friends and her purse. She didn't even know how she'd paid her tab to leave. I asked the security guard for help, and he said he couldn't leave his spot and couldn't do anything. I explained what happened to my friends, and they talked to the hostess about it. The hostess begrudgingly went and checked the lost and found. Her purse was thankfully there, minus the money she had in her wallet, and we managed to call her parents. I talked to her mom because the girl couldn't explain anything, and I promised to stay until her mom arrived to pick her up. 30 minutes later, her mom arrived, and I've never seen someone look so relieved and terrified at the same time. She thanked me and my friends profusely, offering us a ride home. Since we lived in the next town over, she just drove us to the subway station. In the middle of all the craziness, I forgot to exchange numbers with any of them, so I've never heard from that girl or her mom again. But I hope she learned to be more careful with how much she drinks or who she talks to in clubs. Also, shame on her friends for not looking out for her or trying to find her when they realized she was missing. Though maybe they were all just as drunk as she was. Who knows? I know what I did was probably a bit reckless, but I wouldn't be able to just watch that car drive away and live with myself. Please be safe when going out, everyone. And to creeps at nightclubs who try to take advantage of intoxicated people, let's never meet again. This happened to me about 3 years ago. It came up recently with my friends, and they suggested I post it here. I've gone through therapy for it and even trained in firearms because this was the creepiest night of my life. I spent a night in what felt like a horror movie, and it's still so vivid. It was a Wednesday night in the summer. I was off work, my husband was out of town, and our son was staying at his grandma's for the night. I was home alone with my dogs, an 80-pound Aussie mix and my 80-pound German Shepherd Pit Bull mix. I always have trouble sleeping when I'm home alone, so I tend to binge watch TV in the living room until I can't keep my eyes open anymore. This particular night, I remembered that trash pickup was the next day. I decided to watch Game of Thrones for a bit, then take the trash out. All of a sudden, I realized it was 1:30 a.m. and I still hadn't taken the trash to the curb. My house has 2 solid iron gates, one in the front and one to the side door and backyard. Lighting on our street, or anywhere in our neighborhood, isn't great, but it's a quiet neighborhood with a lot of families, and you rarely hear about crime here. I looked out the window by habit before I took the trash out and saw who I thought was my neighbor smoking a cigarette outside his gate across the street, looking directly at me. For context, this was a normal occurrence. My neighbor across the street hides smoking cigarettes from his wife, so he typically does it late at night in front of his gate. I often get off work late, so I usually see him, we wave, say hi, chat a little, and then I go inside. He makes the joke, "You didn't see me smoking if my wife asks." So, unbothered by seeing the guy, I go outside, grab my trash cans, open my squeaky iron gate, and take them out to the curb. I didn't have my glasses on at the time, so as usual, I waved and said hello. However, the guy, who I thought was my neighbor, threw down his cigarette and quickly walked off down the street, It took a minute for me to realize that he was not my neighbor. I was a little creeped out because he was clearly staring into my window from the opposite sidewalk. But I thought maybe it was just a guy out for a night walk, not unusual in our neighborhood, who stopped for a cigarette. I figured I probably weirded him out as much as he weirded me out, and went back inside, settling on the couch with my dogs to keep watching Game of Thrones. At some point I fell asleep. I woke up hearing my gate squeak and my German Shepherd mix growling. He's extremely protective of our family, but he's also the kind of dog you can take anywhere because he's so friendly in public. My Aussie mix is more passive, but his sheer size and scary bark tend to deter people. He's friendly though. I quickly got up and pulled back the curtain. My gate was still shut and I didn't see anything. My dog, however, continued to growl at my front door. I looked out another window which had a better view of my front yard and porch, but I didn't see anything. Eventually, my dog settled back down with my other dog, but I was still uneasy. I ended up watching TV again because I couldn't go back to sleep. About an hour later, I definitely heard my gate squeak. We're the only ones with a heavy cast iron gate and the noise it makes is so distinct. I looked out the curtain while my dog softly growled. My gate was halfway open, but I didn't see anyone. At this point, I was panicking. In my panic, I couldn't find my phone. I grabbed my wooden baseball bat from the room, crouched down, and started going through the couch cushions to find my phone. My dogs were still quietly growling, not barking, so I assumed no one was there. The minute I found my phone, my front door handle started shaking. I ran to the side door to let my German Shepherd mix out. I knew he'd protect me and he could jump the 6-foot back gate. My Aussie mix, going crazy, busted out one of our door side lights. I heard the guy say, "Oh hell no," and immediately I let my German Shepherd mix out. I jumped up to look out the window and saw my dog latch onto the guy's hand. The guy started screaming and took off down the street, my dog chasing him. I became terrified he'd hurt my dog, so I ran out with my baseball bat, screaming my dog's name over and over. The next thing I know, my dog was prancing down the street back to me, happy as could be with blood all over his face. I called the police, but they took another hour or so to show up and didn't seem to take me too seriously. They said they'd call local hospitals, but I never heard back. I called my husband bawling, and he got on the next flight home. I stayed at his mom's for a few days, too terrified to go home. I did buy my dogs giant ribeyes for being so good in saving me. I don't know what that guy wanted, but since then I've been trained in firearms and self-defense. So, creepy guy, let's not meet again because my dog might finish the job you started. To preface this, I am currently 19, soon to be 20. Due to a vindictive teacher, she manipulated the grades so I had to repeat the 3rd grade because I called another student a brat for crying about wanting her mom. The context behind this is irrelevant, but here's the rundown. This girl thought that because her mom was a teacher, she could cry her way into her mom's class. Her mom was a high school teacher and she would almost always cry until she was allowed to go. And her poor mom would be distraught having to leave her class and pick her daughter up because she wanted attention. I ended up snapping and telling the girl that she was in the 3rd grade and too old to be crying for her mom and disrupting other students. It was probably harsh, but you could tell this girl was spoiled. On to the actual person in question. In August of 2023, I was in my junior year. I went to a trade school in Sumeru County for graphic design. A sophomore named James had noticed that I wouldn't be dropped off at our home school like he was. He offered to drive me home. I didn't know this kid well. I had spoken to him a few times, but other than that, I wasn't buddy-buddy with him. I told him my mom prefers to meet people before letting me ride in a random person's car, especially a guy. Since I was 18 at the time, I told him that if he got into a wreck, I would be responsible as the adult in the car. After that, he didn't bother me with anything. We still talked, and I could tell he wasn't neurotypical. It wasn't until my senior year that things got creepy. We exchanged numbers because I would sometimes help him with homework he didn't fully understand and give recommendations for horror channels on YouTube, such as Reddit stories, creepypasta readings, or channels that cover disturbing videos like Hannah the Horrible, Nick Crowley, and Nexpo. Within a month, he found my home address. I never told him where I lived, and he got dropped off way earlier than me. The way the homeschool worked was that all the students on the west side of Fontaine going into Sulani would go to one singular middle school and high school, while students from East Fontaine going into the U would go to another high school. I never told this kid where I lived, let alone a rough area. I started documenting everything at this point, no matter how big or small. In the following months, if I fell asleep on the bus, he would tap my headphones, snap them on my ears, kick my legs, shake me, or call my phone just to get me to talk to him. In April, he asked me to go to prom with him, and I tried to tell him multiple times that I wasn't interested. He tried to manipulate me, but I just lied and told him that I had a family event that day. After that, I mentioned his behavior to the principal, especially about him harassing and shaming people to go to prom, and he gave the most insincere apology ever. He worded it like he was forced to apologize. The next day, I got a phone call from him asking if my sister drove a red car and worked at Sangonomiya Coffee House. I quickly told him no and blocked his number. I went to administration, coupled with the fact that this kid would call to ask if I went to the Dollar General, went to work, or was at home. He would tell me thoughts he had about killing his mom's boyfriend, how he wanted to smash his teeth in, smack his phone against the window, and try to manipulate me into calling while he was having a panic attack. He also ranted about how my math teacher needed to be gutted because she was overweight and that fat women are ugly and horrible vessels for producing babies. She's not overweight due to poor diet. She has a medical condition that caused a buildup of estrogen. The worst was when he lashed out in anger about losing his AirPod case and aggressively stomped on his AirPods, literally foaming at the mouth. I went to the principal and liaison after this, only to be unable to speak, and they yelled at me for an hour about how I was being mean to a kid on the spectrum. They claimed my information, my mother's information, and my sister's information were public. I started having a panic attack and called my mom. At this point, I was literally vomiting in the trash can of the conference room. My mother was furious. She told me to call the sheriff's office after I got home. The sheriff actually went to this kid's house and told him to knock it off, or I had every right to file stalking and harassment charges. The 180 Women's Shelter confirmed that what the principal and liaison did was disgusting and dangerous. So far, I haven't seen him, and I still have his number blocked. Hopefully, I don't see this little creep anymore. To James, if you see this post by some chance, stay the heck away from me and my sister. I hope your future general finds out about this. Yeah, that's right. This guy wants to be in the army. Should I see him again, I won't hesitate to press charges against him. I don't care if it ruins his life forever. He's a danger to those around him and potentially to himself. I apologize in advance since I'm not a great writer, but I'll do my best to share my experience. To better paint the picture, here's a description of myself at the time of this incident, 3 years ago. 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium-length bleach blonde hair, curvy at 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time I lived in a rough part of a large city. I had experienced many sketchy situations before, so I guess I felt invincible, like nothing truly scary could happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety just in case. About halfway home and roughly 10 minutes from my apartment, I noticed a van started tailing me. I was used to this because, in my city, it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for sex. It's embarrassing how desensitized I had become to it. I did my usual and crossed the road to walk beside the traffic heading in the other direction. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. The van then turned down a side street, then back onto the road I was on and pulled up to me. At this point, I still wasn't scared. Again, this had happened so many times before, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin, or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankles. That area was notorious for that type of activity. I decided to be firm and told the person sternly, "I'm not interested." I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical, so they may have been twins or brothers. Both men had a very dark complexion, dark eyes, and short dark hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured this would be enough for them to stop following me. They didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I'd never had to put that much effort into getting a creepy guy to leave me alone, so this is when I started feeling unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to piss off. I thought it finally worked. It had been 3 minutes, and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled out my phone and was getting ready to call my sister, who I lived with. Just then, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door, and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, like he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area was very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagine that that's what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You are being filmed in my live video chat." I gave my friends your license plate number, and the police had been notified. I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone more as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van and they sped off. I've never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone now, even during the daytime. To the 2 creeps in a van, let's never meet again. I hope karma finds you both soon. This story happened to me in 2022 when I was around 24 years old. For a bit of context, I am non-binary, assigned female at birth. But let's say I look very feminine. At the time, I was studying in Paris and renting a room in the house of my boyfriend's mom, who lived in a city more than an hour away from Paris, but 20 minutes from Versailles, another important city in France. It was winter during a school break, and I was going out in Paris to see a longtime internet friend for the first time. She turned out to be a very toxic and problematic person whom I'm not in contact with anymore, but the story is not about her. I must mention that I have a rather petite frame due to an eating disorder I have been dealing with since childhood, and I've always looked much younger than my age. Even these days, I need to show my ID when I want to buy alcohol. On the day of my encounter with my friend, I was dressed casually in a skirt. Our meeting went very well, but since I lived far away and was planning to go to my boyfriend's house later, I had to leave before midnight because the public transportation would become scarce after 10 p.m., and I had about 2 hours of transit to get there. Unfortunately, I didn't leave early enough, so I managed to get a train to Versailles, but would have to wait almost an hour to get a bus to the nearest city to my boyfriend's house where he would pick me up with his car. While I was waiting near the train station, I noticed a group of bus drivers who were smoking and talking to each other. I approached them to ask which one of them was going to drive the bus to insert name of the city closest to my boyfriend's house, and one of them, a small man with gray hair, probably in his late 40s to early 50s, told me that it was him. He noticed my skirt and said that I must be freezing, so he offered me to go heat myself in the bus and wait there until the departure time. I gladly accepted as I was indeed freezing, and while he was walking me to the bus, which was parked in a very dark corner with no lights, he got very close to me and started acting very familiar, asking me where I live and where I was going and such. I was feeling uneasy and uncomfortable, but I was raised to be polite and I've always been a people pleaser, so I answered all his questions with as little detail as possible until we reached the bus. He opened the door for me, and while all my instincts were screaming at me to not get in the bus, I ignored them and got in anyway. I sat at the front of the bus where there was a bit of light. Mind you, I am black, and even in the dark it would have been very difficult for anyone to see me. Besides the other bus drivers who saw me leave with the driver, no one knew I was in that bus. Anyway, the second I got in the bus, things got even weirder. He threw his lit cigarette away and got in the bus with me as well, all while telling me a bunch of anecdotes about the bus, like how the bus was actually designed to transport the French football team and how there was a huge table and even a bathroom at the back of the bus, and that I should come in the back of the bus with him to see. He suggested twice that I come to the back of the bus where there were absolutely no lights, and this scared me even more, so I texted my boyfriend, "Might not come tonight, weird bus driver. Call me as soon as possible," while ignoring the driver rambling. He then came back to the front of the bus and stayed in the corridor blocking my way. He talked about random things I don't remember, and all the time his eyes were fixated on me, especially on my phone that was in my hand and my knees and thighs. All the time I was praying for my boyfriend to see my message and call me, and when he finally did, I breathed a sigh of relief. The driver must have seen the face of my boyfriend on the screen of my phone because he took a step back and told me that he was going to smoke another cigarette outside. I answered my phone and told my boyfriend everything that was going on while looking out the window to keep an eye on the bus driver. When he was far enough, I ran to get out of the bus, only to discover in shock and horror that he had locked the door. I was trapped in that bus, and no one knew where I was except my boyfriend and the creepy bus driver, and the other bus drivers who had seen me leave with him. Still on the phone with my boyfriend, I went back to where I was previously sitting, and saw through the window that the creepy bus driver was coming back. When he saw me on the phone, he left and locked the bus again. He did this circus back and forth a total of 3 times, locking the bus behind him every time. But the last time he stayed near the bus, so I hung up with my boyfriend and decided to text him instead. At some point, I sat on another seat to keep an eye on the creepy bus driver, and through the window I saw and heard an elderly woman ask him if his bus was going to the city nearest to my boyfriend's house. He deliberately lied to her, telling her that it would be another bus. At this point, I was freaking out, frantically texting my boyfriend that I was going to die. that the bus driver would do terrible things to me and then kill me and throw my body away. It was at this moment that the bus driver went back into the bus and locked the door again. We were supposed to leave in less than 10 minutes, and suddenly something finally snapped in my brain. I got up trying to maintain a calm appearance and lied to him, saying I needed to go back to the train station to use the bathroom. He told me there were bathrooms on the bus, so I lied again, saying I needed some snacks from the vending machine. He hesitated and finally agreed to let me go. But before he did so, he pretended twice that the button to open the doors wasn't working. At this point, I didn't care about hiding my distress anymore. I told him that if he couldn't open the door, I'd pick up the emergency hammer to break the door, and suddenly the button was working again. I bolted out of the bus and took the deepest breath of cold, fresh winter air I've ever taken. I've never been in prison, but I imagine that it's what it feels like to be released from prison. I then ran up to the train station, hid behind a vending machine, and when I finally felt safe, I burst into tears. I called my boyfriend back and he told me that he had called his sister, who lived in Versailles, so that her boyfriend would come and pick me up. While I was trying to calm myself, guess who I saw coming into the train station? The creepy bus driver. He was acting like he was looking for something, or rather someone, and that was likely me. I held my breath and waited for him to leave, and then I cried some more because I realized at that moment that I was his prey, and I was right about his bad intentions. Finally, my boyfriend's sister's boyfriend arrived and took me back to where I live. I couldn't sleep that night or the following days. My insomnia worsened. I filed a complaint with the bus company, but since he wasn't a usual driver for them, nothing was done, and I didn't even receive an answer. I am very grateful for everyone who helped me that night, and I know it has been said before, but let me say it again as a reminder. Trust your gut. Trust your instincts. They're never wrong. Also, screw being polite with creeps that make you feel uncomfortable or uneasy. Thank you for your time and attention. Stay safe, everyone, and have a nice life. So, this happened to me almost 7 years ago now. I should give some background info before getting into things. At the time, I was around 16 years old, and I had a friend I'll call Karen who was dating a boy named John. At this point in time, Karen and John had been dating for maybe 6 months. After going out with Karen and John on many occasions, they decided they wanted to hook me up with John's friend, we'll call him Cameron. At this point, I had met Cameron in person once. He was nice. So I gave him my social media, and we had chatted a couple of times. It's important to note he didn't have my number or know where I lived. Now it's time for the story. Fast forward to one night, maybe a week or two after I met Cameron. I'm laying in bed, it's about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I get a call from an unknown number. Thinking, why the hell is an unknown number calling me at this time of night? I decide to answer it and see who it is. So I answer the phone and say, "Hi," and a man responds saying, "Hi back," since I didn't recognize the voice on the other end. I ask the person who they are. Instead of giving me an answer to this question, the man on the line tells me to look outside my window. Thinking this is probably a prank call, I tell the man to F off and hang up the phone. Once I did this, the number calls back again, but I didn't answer it. The person then proceeds to call me another 4 times until I finally answer the phone. Again, I ask, "Who the heck is calling?" This time, the person responds and tells me that one of my friends gave him my number and that I'm the guy he's been talking to. At this point, my stupid 16-year-old mind is trying to rationalize this, and the only person I can think of is Cameron. Before I can say anything to this person, he again tells me to look out my window because he's outside, and I begin hearing noises outside my window. Now, I should mention that my room is right beside my parents' room, and being stupid, my first thought was that this fool was going to wake them up, and I'd never hear the end of it. Let me tell you, that thought soon turned into the last thing I would worry about that night. Anyway, at this point I'm also starting to get creeped out. I'm thinking to myself, okay, if this is Cameron and Karen did give him my number, how the hell would he know where I live? So I reply to the man and say, Cameron. The man says yes and tells me to look out my window. I reply telling him to go home and hang up the phone again. Weirded out, I decide I'm going to get up and go into my basement and call Karen so that hopefully my parents don't hear me talking from my room. This is really important because to get into my basement I have to pass a door that is partially made of glass. So I get downstairs and call Karen. She answers, clearly half asleep. I tell Karen about the unknown call, which I'm assuming is from Cameron, and how he is telling me to look out my window because he's outside, and on top of this that I can hear someone out there. Karen, now clearly awake, tells me she has never given Cameron my number or address and calls John quickly from her home phone to see if maybe he did. At this point, John answers and tells Karen that not only had he never given my information out, he is with Cameron. They tell me if someone's outside, I need to hang up and call the police immediately. So I hang up the phone, and before I can even go to dial anyone, I get another call. Guess who? Unknown number. So I stupidly answer again. And before I get a word in, the man tells me that he knows I'm in my basement. He saw me walking by my back door. Now I'm clearly disturbed as I did just walk by my back door to get downstairs. So I know someone is outside. Again, before I could say anything, the man tells me to come outside. So, stupidly, I tell the person I'm calling the police and hang up the phone. Why I didn't call the police at this point, I really don't know. Probably because I was 16, stupid, and literally in panic mode. Not more than a minute later, I get another call. Unknown number. I answer again, and the man then tells me to come outside or he's coming inside to get me. Clearly panicking at this point, I have this deep gut feeling that if I go outside, I'm never coming back. However, I do have to go by the door again to get back upstairs, and that was equally terrifying me. So I hang up the phone again and muster up the courage to run upstairs, because the last place I wanted to be was in a part of my house no one else was in. I get more calls. Unknown number, unknown number, unknown number. Again, my 16-year-old stupidity answers. This time, the voice on the phone sounds shook and says to me that police stopped him outside my house and want to speak to me to make sure I know him. The phone then gets passed off to someone who identifies themselves by name with some title I no longer remember, and asks if I know the man outside my address. He says my house number and street. I quickly tell the voice on the phone I don't have any idea who the person calling me is and hang up the phone. I never got another call again. However, I did sit there all night holding a bat and had problems sleeping for months. I should also mention I didn't have many friends at this point in my life. Looking back on this night, I thought maybe this was a prank taken too far. However, I begged the few friends I did have for months to admit that one of them was the person who pulled this off. And to this day, they all insist none of them did this. So whatever got this person to stop calling me, thank God. And to the unknown caller, let's not meet. I was around 8 or 9 when this happened. I went to visit my grandparents on the other side of town, They lived 5 minutes away from an elementary school, and I would often walk to it to play on the playground. A young family with a daughter my age lived right next door, and we would play together whenever I came over. One day we decided to take a walk after having fun at the park. We still had energy and dinner wasn't ready yet, so we wandered through the neighborhood. We were laughing and picking flowers along the way when I noticed a white van. We continued our walk, and before you know it, I had completely forgotten all about it. My friend had stopped to tie her shoe, and I was looking around for more flowers to pick when I realized that we had gone a lot further than we ever had before. I didn't recognize the houses in front of me, and it was going to get dark soon. As soon as the thought enters my mind, I see the white van rounding the corner heading towards us. My stomach sank. It was the same van from earlier, but something seemed different. They stopped in the middle of the road and stared at us. I tell my friend that we need to go, and I ask her if she recognizes the houses around us or the van in front of us. She doesn't. I tell her that we should probably head home, and she agrees. The van then drives past us slowly, and the man in the passenger seat rolls down the window. "Do you girls know where Apple Street is?" We both say no, and I get a good look at the van. It has a picture of a vacuum on the side and a company name I don't remember. He tells us that they are cleaning houses in the neighborhood and they can't find the street they're looking for. I know I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, so I grab my friend's hand and tell the men, "Sorry, but no, we don't." And we keep walking. We begin our walk home, and my uneasy feeling grows stronger with every step of the way. We were going back the same way we came when I start to recognize the houses. We're about 10 minutes away. Then I hear it, the van coming down the street behind us. I tell my friend to grab a rock from the path because now I'm sure they're following us. I'm scared, but I know that we're not too far from my grandparents' house and we can get there faster if we run, so that's what we do. Picture 2 terrified 8-year-old girls running down the street with the softball-sized rocks in their hands. I look back and see the van racing after us, and I can hear someone yelling. It's the man driving, and I hear the word directions. I stop because I'm out of breath, and I think maybe that's all they wanted, and I was probably just overreacting. Boy, was I wrong. As soon as I stop, my friend does too. So does the van. I get a good look at the driver this time, and he's explaining that all they wanted was directions. But I know something is wrong, and before I get the words out, the sliding door opens and a man in the back is coming towards us. We throw the rocks at him and run as fast as we can to my grandparents' house. When we get inside, we start crying our eyes out. My mom had apparently arrived while we were gone, and I run to her and my grandma and tell them what happened. She runs outside, yelling at my grandma to call the cops while she looks for the van. She sees it parked 2 houses down, and she charges it like a bull. I had run out after her, so I'm standing there screaming. My mom is tiny, but she is fierce and in mama bear mode. The van starts to pull away, and I'll never forget what happened next. She jumps onto the hood of the van and starts beating on their window. They stop and she yells that she's making a citizen's arrest and they need to stop their car. They act like they are going to and they slowly pull over and park. She gets off the hood and as soon as she does, they race off. Thank God she managed to remember their license plate. When the police get there, they ask us so many questions, and I try to explain everything that happened from the moment I first saw the van. They run the license plate number, and it comes back as out of state. They say that I can go now and they want to speak to my mom alone. When she comes back inside, I hear her talking to my grandma in the kitchen. What she said makes my blood run cold to this day. The man who owned the car was linked to a kidnapping out of state and had a bolo, be on the lookout, out for his arrest. The police ended up arresting all three men, and we had to go in to give an official statement. My friend, my mom, and I picked all three of them out of the lineup, and they were charged with the kidnapping out of state and our attempted kidnapping. I never went walking in my grandparents' neighborhood after that, and I still cringe when I see a white van. That's when I realize there is a reason for the creepy white van stories after all. It was probably only after my close call that my mind really started to run away with what could have happened were it not for my dog. I'm a 26-year-old female. I live with my fiance, my two cats, and my dog Rowan. Our house is literally less than a minute away from a huge farmer's field that is frequented by many dog walkers at all times of the day. My partner and I often take turns walking Rowan around the field throughout the day. It was only around 7:30 p.m., and it was still really bright and sunny. Rowan was letting me know it was time to go for a walk. So while my partner was tinkering in the garage, I grabbed his leash and headed to the field. Let me quickly tell you about Rowan. He's a 2-year-old Rottweiler who is very loving and playful, if a little daft, but would not hurt a fly, no bad bone in his body. He is also extremely well trained. We made sure to put the effort in as he's a big dog breed with a bad reputation. So we wanted to make a point of not feeding into stereotypes. I'm very much of the opinion that there are no bad dogs, just bad owners. Unfortunately, we've had some run-ins with not-so-good dog owners, so Rowan gets a little nervous when meeting new dogs and people, but we're working on it. Anyway, back to the story. We're walking around the farmer's field and Rowan is off sniffing and peeing on every blade of grass in sight. I always keep an eye out for other walkers because of Rowan's nerves, and I clocked a guy on his own walking down the path towards me, fairly far away. At first, I thought nothing of it, as plenty of people walk this route without dogs. We were just coming out of lockdown in the UK. As the guy got closer, I noticed he was in a full tracksuit with the hood up, which was odd because it was about 23 degrees, perfect shorts and t-shirt weather. He then took a small path off the field, leading through some bushes. It was a public shortcut, not an official footpath, but it was well enough used, so I kept walking, thinking nothing of it. At about 15 meters away from the path he took, Rowan shot back to my side immediately, dropping the mouthful of dirt he'd been pretending not to eat. He's not the smartest. I petted him and noticed he was standing super alert, staring at the path entrance. When I looked up, I caught a glimpse of the man peeking around the edge of the bushes that concealed the entrance. I stopped dead in my tracks and Rowan's fur was standing on end as he positioned himself in front of me. It took me a second to realize that this man had been watching and waiting in the bushes for me to approach. My current route would have meant I'd be walking right by the path's opening. My stomach dropped as I realized we were the only ones around on that field. I had this weird moment where I was almost trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But then the guy whistled. Not a wolf whistle, but as if to try and get my dog to come to him. Rowan was having none of it though, and I definitely took that as my cue to trust my stranger danger instincts. I immediately turned and speed-walked back the way we came, simultaneously pulling my phone out and dialing my partner's number. I ended up having to clip on Rowan's leash to get him to walk with me, and he was not taking his eyes away from the path. He was even growling a little, which was so out of character and put me on edge even more. I glanced back, and the man had edged slightly out of the bushes watching me walk away. My partner answered the phone after a few rings. I was only halfway through stammering out the story, and he was already sprinting up to the field to meet me, telling me to stay on the phone but to keep an eye on the man. The man in the tracksuit now fully came out of the bushes and just stood staring at me walking away. I dared a quick look away from him towards the entrance to the field to see my fiancé jogging towards me. He was relieved I was okay, but was also immediately pointing and shouting, "Is that him?" Clearly furious at what this man might have had in mind, had Rowan not picked up on him hiding in the bushes. I eventually convinced my fiancé not to confront him, as he was still standing there staring, almost taunting us. You never know what people might be capable of or have concealed. We came off the field and took Rowan on a different walk, which he was more than happy about. I have never been so proud of Rowan for stepping up and protecting me. Safe to say he got plenty of treats and fuss when we got home. So creepy man in the bushes, let's not meet. When I was about 16, which was 9 years ago, my family was living in a suburban area outside of Los Angeles. It was a nice neighborhood where kids rode their bikes in a group, parents waved to each other, and helped keep an eye on each other's houses. You could even join a barbecue if you walked by at the right time. Well, my dad worked nights at a hospital in the city, and that left me, a 16-year-old, my mom, 36, my sister, 12, and my brother, 8, home at night from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. the next day. One night we were cooking, listening to music, and just having a good time. Everyone was in bed by 9 p.m. I was suddenly woken up by the sound of our front door being rattled, and my mom calling for my dad like he was home. Our house was laid out like this. There was a front door and a small entryway. The right side wall, facing the door from outside, was my brother's room. My sister and I were on the other side of him. The doorway led into our dining room. My mom's room was off from the living room toward the back of the house, so she typically turned on lights when she came by our rooms. It wasn't all that uncommon for my dad to get off a shift a few hours early and end up home before 7. Our front door had frosted glass in the middle, which was clear enough to see whoever was at the door. The door was old and a little off, so you typically had to put some force into opening it, even if it was unlocked. This part my mom filled in. She had gotten up also hearing the door, and thought my dad was home just like I did. However, when calling out for my dad to confirm and turning on the light, whoever it was at the door froze and noticeably jumped. She had been walking closer to the door to open it and help him, still half asleep, when she realized the man in the doorway was as tall as my dad, but had a full head of hair. His outline didn't match the familiar shape of my dad coming home in scrubs. This man was wider than my dad, and once he saw my mom in the doorway, he not only started turning the knob but also began throwing himself against the frosted glass. I don't know what kept me from rolling over and going back to bed, but in the next few seconds I heard my mom scream. I sat up in time to hear her footsteps and see her disappear into her bedroom, only to come back out with the revolver my dad had bought her for her birthday. By then, I had checked my cell phone and saw it was 1:30 in the morning. I dialed 911 while my mom was pointing the gun at whoever was at the door, trying to force their way inside. "Stop or I'll shoot you. I am on the phone with the police and they're on their way. I will use force if you enter my home." My mom screamed at the huge man at the door, who, after hearing her the second and third time, finally stepped back from the door and just stared at us through the frosted glass. After a moment's thought, he seemed to like his chances and stepped forward again, only to run once my mom pulled the pin back and repeated what she had been saying. adding that she might decide not to wait for him to be inside. He ran off, as I mentioned, and I stayed on the phone with 911 while my mom stood at the doorway, her gun still in both her hands, aimed at the door the way my dad had taught her to hold it just the weekend before when we'd all gone to the range. It was only a moment after the man had fled that two uniformed officers filled the doorway the man had just been in. When they knocked, I realized, after my mom didn't respond to them identifying themselves, how terrified she was. Her voice shook as she told the officers that she had a weapon, but that she wanted to hear their badge numbers before she would open the door, so I could confirm with the dispatcher. Once they did, she opened the revolver, unloaded it, and placed it on the table, crying as I opened the door for the police. They took our statements, had several patrol cars out looking, and found him a few hours later, 6 blocks from our home. However, he had made it into the house he was trying to break into when they caught him in the middle of robbing the retired couple he had knocked unconscious. So, to our would-be home invader, let's not meet,